We got a great lineup. We're going to kick it off with really one of the leading experts and firms in the outdoor economy and capturing the impact of this amazing industry. Talk about how to build an outdoor community. We're going to get into the nuts and bolts, right? How do you take these things and pull them together? It's really about partnerships and bringing the community together through a really intentional and strategic engagement process. We have some experts talking about that. We're going to get into some case studies and examples of some projects and communities that have done some amazing work leveraging outdoor recreation to change many aspects of their community and using some really innovative funding models, which I'm excited to hear about and learn from. And then we're going to really finish it up with our sessions with talking about how do you take all those pieces, how do you pull it all together, how do you craft that brand to tell that story, which really helps you amplify and really deliver a full ROI on your investment and all the work you've been doing for some cases many, many years to get to the point where you are, and how do you keep it going forward. We're going to finish it up with, again, Amy Allison to talk about an awesome statewide initiative here, and then we're going to celebrate the closing of the conference in Outdoor Economy October, and then kick into some networking. So I'm looking forward to the day. Hope you are too, but really want to get moving, and let's dive into our first speaker. We're here to kick this thing off with Ray Rasker from Headwaters Economics. Ray's joining us from Montana today. If I'm not mistaken, last time we talked, there was snow. We had a tropical storm here today, but it's now sunny and beautiful. So Ray, we're probably dealing with a very different environment here. Ray is the executive director of Headwaters Economics, an independent nonprofit research group. Headwaters Economics' mission is to improve community development and land management decisions. They dabble and focus in a lot of different areas, from federal land, state tax policy, wildfire risk to communities, and of course, something very important to what we're talking about today, community trails, pathways, and economic development around the outdoor industry. They are the leading experts in the outdoor economic world. If you have not been to their site, you've not seen their data, their research, it's loaded. Check it out. Ray, really excited to have you here. Welcome to the Outdoor Economy Conference, and thanks for kicking off the Building Outdoor Communities Day.
Hi, thanks. That was a heck of an introduction. I'm going to share my screen. I think you need to enable screen sharing.
I don't know why Zoom is so cantankerous sometimes. Look at that big.
We're all ready to not do Zoom anymore.
Oh, I know.
At some point in our lives. Still can't do this screen share.
Yeah, just give me 1 second.
1 sec, Ray. We got a hosting issue for some reason. We're figuring it out. In the meantime, why don't you kind of walk us through what you'll be talking about today, kind of the big picture?
Sure. So I'm going to talk about a couple of things. One is using economic arguments to make the case for outdoor recreation, how you go about doing that. And then I'm going to share with you some research we've done on recreation communities. What do we know about recreation communities, both good, the bad, and the ugly, about what happens when you decide to go down that path. And I'm going to end with some resources that we have available on our website. Also, everything that I'm about to share with you, the entire slide deck with the references, all the citations, is on our website. So when you go to our website in the search feature, just type slides or slideshows, and you'll see it there, and you can see everything that I'm presenting to you. So,
that's ready to go?
Ready to share screen?
Yep, we had a computer snatch the hosting away from us, Ray. We got it all figured out. Thank you for your patience.
Right.
Take it away, Ray.
I think we're up and running. Here we are. How to build an outdoor community. So this is me. This is what I look like. This is my little dog Ollie, and this is what my garage looks like. Just to get across the point that I'm serious about the outdoors. I'm serious about biking in particular. I think about 3/4 of my cerebral cortex is taken up by all things related to biking. And this is the community where I live. This is Bozeman, Montana, as the sun's setting. And this is the Main Street to the Mountains trail system. So we're surrounded by mountains on all sides. And our land trust just recently completed an entire network of trails that connects us to the mountains right from Main Street. So I'm going to talk to you about two things. One is how to talk about the economic benefits of outdoor recreation, all the different ways that we can use to talk about how we benefit from outdoor recreation. And then I want to talk about what it means to be an outdoor community. So let's launch into this. Ways to talk about the economic benefits. A lot of people start and often only go as far as talking about the tourism benefits, that you've got outdoor assets, you've got a beautiful place, people want to come and play there, and certainly that attracts tourists. But what I'm here to tell you is that is just one of 8 ways that you can talk about the economic benefits of the outdoors. And I'm sure there's more. I think in the time we have here, we'll talk about 8 of them. So let me launch into this. I'll go through them one by one. Number 1 is expenditures. People just spend a lot of money on outdoor gear. And they spend a lot of money on getting themselves to places where they can play outdoors. And the Outdoor Industry Association, with the help of Southwick and Associates, are the leading group that documented this. They did a household survey of consumer spending. They asked people how much money they spend on a whole variety of different activities. And they decided, after they were doing their analysis, that, wow, this is a massive industry that employs about 7.6 million people. And it generates about $887 billion in consumer spending. But what does that mean? I mean, 887 billion, is that a big number? I think so, but give me something to compare it to. Well, it's twice the amount that we spend on motor vehicles. It's twice the Walmart sales. It's 50 times the revenues of the National Football League. So now I'm getting a better sense that how absolutely massive this industry is. The second way to talk about the economic benefits of outdoors is to talk about gross domestic product. Here's my friend Carl. He owns Carl Strong Bikes, and this is his shop, and there he is with the raw material. What does he do with that raw material, and how does it end up resulting in the finished product? That's one of the things that the Bureau of Economic Analysis measured. And they measured how outdoor products and services contribute to GDP. So what we mean by that is all the goods and services across the entire economy as it contributes to GDP. And they call this the outdoor recreation satellite account. And they decided, well, it's 2.2% of GDP. Is that a big number? It turns out to be, it is. It's bigger than the contribution to GDP from mining, from legal services. Think of all the attorneys in the entire country combined. It's bigger than that. It's bigger than educational services, bigger than motor vehicle sales, bigger than the airline industry. And there's a lot of different parts to the way that outdoor recreation contributes to GDP. It's transportation and warehousing, it's advertising and marketing, it's manufacturing. And so one of the things that BEA did well in their study is they looked at all the sectors throughout the entire economy and their relative contribution to outdoor recreation GDP. So you can see it's obviously arts and entertainment and food services, but it's also retail trade, it's also manufacturing, all the way down to including healthcare. So every sector of our economy is involved in outdoor recreation in one way or another. And it generates about 2.5 million jobs, according to the estimates by the Bureau of Economic Analysis. Putting this into perspective, that's more than hospitals, educational services, real estate, and legal services. A third way to talk about the economic benefit of the outdoors is to talk about tourism and how they spend money, and that in turn creates jobs. So here's an example. This is a community that we've been working with for some time. This is Whitefish, Montana. It's just outside of Glacier National Park. And the goal there was to create a series of trails that go all the way around the lake. And they'd already built quite a few of these trails. And what they were interested in, what's been our economic impact so far? And the reason they wanted to know this is they wanted to be able to raise more money. And they wanted to be able to say, this is a good return on investment. So what we did is we established infrared counters. We had people standing at the trailheads, interviewing people, where are you from? How much money did you spend? And we also used socially generated data, especially from Strava, which is a separate conversation, but it's a really interesting new technology. And what we found out was that visitors to Whitefish, their spending generated 68 new jobs in that community and $1.9 million in labor income. So that's an example of how you measure tourist expenditures. The other way to talk about the benefits of the outdoors is to talk about return on investment. So in Whitefish, the return on investment there was $2.5 for every $1 spent. So this is a powerful thing that the trail advocates in Whitefish can then use to say, when we use tax money, or we use money from a foundation, or we use money from a government grant, we're leveraging this. And for every $1 that you give us, we're generating $2.5 in economic benefit locally. In the Methil Valley in Washington, they spent a lot of money developing ski trails, purposely to boost the local economy. The return on investment there was $6 for every $1 spent. In Montana, we have 170,000 miles of rivers, but these rivers are useless to us unless we have access to them. So using Land and Water Conservation Fund money, 332 fishing access sites were built, which cost $50 million. In return, anglers spend $900 million every year in the state of Montana. That's a return on investment of $18 for every $1 spent. So that's return on investment. Another way to think about it, this is a photo of just outside of Bozeman, is fairly obvious. People want to live close to outdoor recreation. It's not just for tourists, it's for those of us who live in the community. So back to the example of Whitefish, when we look at expenditures by locals, not by tourists, but by locals, the locals who use the Whitefish Trail spent twice as much on gear shops locally than those who didn't use the trail. So it's those of us who live in the community who also contribute to economic activity. And when we interviewed in Whitefish, when we interviewed locals, and we said on the scale of 1 to 5, why did you move to Whitefish? It's summer recreation, it's the community, it's winter recreation. Ranking pretty low is friends and family and job. So people move there to recreate. They move there to be part of the community. Now, another way to think about it is business location. These are all examples of CEOs of corporations who live in Montana. And they moved here for the quality of life. And they moved here largely because they have access to outdoor recreation. They could live anywhere. And they said, no, I want to live in a place that has good outdoor recreation facilities. So when you look at downtown Bozeman, where I live, it looks like a Western tourist town. Do yourself a favor and go look what's behind the Western facade, and go look on the second floor of all these buildings. And you'll find companies like Schedulicity. They have 4 million customers worldwide. They have 50 employees. And Jerry, there in the middle in blue, why did he move to Bozeman? Because he wanted outdoor recreation nearby. So a survey of high-tech businesses in Montana, 70% of business owners said that it was the Montana lifestyle that was a factor in deciding to locate their business in Montana. And then closely related to the previous point is that of recruiting talent. So this is an aerial photo of Zoom Enterprises. They work with the banking industry, and they recruit based on access to the outdoors. So this is Salt Lake. And if you look at the recruitment page of Goldman Sachs, their online recruitment page, what do they say? They say Salt Lake City offers great outdoor recreation with 15 national parks and monuments, all within a one-day drive. When one of the country's big financial shops is saying, we can recruit talented employees, we have a competitive advantage over other parts of the country because we have access to the outdoors. That's a very powerful thing. And it's a very powerful messenger as well. And then finally, we have retirement and investment income. I'll give you a good example of how important this is. The Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument, when it was designated, it was controversial because there was a big debate. There was an opportunity for it to become a coal mine. And people say, well, why should we stack coal mining up against tourism? Why replace the potential for a high-paying job with the potential for low-paying jobs in tourism? And what we find out when you look at the data is that what drives that area, this is Kane County, Utah, the southern half, the most populated part of the Grand Staircase, you find that retirement and investment income is half of all personal income. It's the single largest thing driving that economy. And it's 60% of net growth since the monument was designated. So retirement and investment income is a big driver. And people like my friend Peter Gillespie moved there because of access to the outdoors. So now let me switch to the second part of my presentation, which is, so you want to be an outdoor community. What are you getting into? And it would be nice to settle in a place that has recreational facilities. Well, if you look at the Economic Research Service of the USDA, they have a way of categorizing counties based on their relative dependency. And what you see in dark blue here are counties that they call recreation counties. They have employment and earnings that heavily depend on recreation-related industries, and they also have seasonal housing. And so there's a whole characterization of what is a recreation-dependent counties. So when we look at those, we realize they have higher rates of migration. In blue is a recreation county, in gray is a non-recreation county, in metro, micro, or rural, the rate of in-migration is higher with places that are characterized as recreation counties. And also, who's moving in? Well, the people moving into these communities have higher incomes. So the people who move into recreation counties have much higher incomes than people who move into non-recreation counties. So you have a higher rate of migration and you have movement in of people who are relatively wealthier. Of course, this has led in the current environment to this whole notion of virus refugees. We see it here in downtown Bozeman. We see it in our real estate market. People are buying homes sight unseen because of the perception that it's safer here. This is one of the downsides. The COVID-19 infection rate is 4 times higher than other rural counties in recreation counties. And in terms of hospitalization, one of the disadvantages of a rural recreation county is that the hospitals are locally funded, and that funding formula is based on the resident population, not on the visitor population. This is one of the reasons when the pandemic first started, Moab, Utah was asking people to stay away. They only had 2 intensive care hospital beds available. We have a tool on our website where you can look for all the recreation counties and you can look at their dependence on locally funded hospitals. And it's a significant problem. When we look at workers in the top 10 most at-risk industries, these are frontline workers. So 80% of the frontline workers in at-risk industries are very common in recreation counties, food services and drinking places, general merchandise stores, laundry services, amusement, gambling, accommodation, clothing stores. So we have a lot of frontline workers in recreation counties, and they're most at risk from COVID. We also know that recreation counties have less affordable housing. When you look at the amount of money or wages that people spend on mortgage or rent, it's higher in recreation dependent counties than non-recreation counties. And there's a we did a fairly detailed statistical analysis on trying to figure out what's related to increases in mortgage costs and rent costs. And there's a number of factors. Here's 4 of them. One of them is population growth. When you have a 10% increase in population, you get about a 10% increase in the amount of money that people spent on rent. Income inequality happens also when you have lots of growth. That also drives up housing costs. The presence of higher paying jobs, places that are growing and diversifying and succeeding tend to also create higher paying jobs. That also drives up rent, and then wealth in general, including non-labor income. So what we have is what we call a recreation premium. The high quality of life that characterizes a recreation county comes with higher housing costs. That's just one of the downsides. But I would pose this question: is a recreation community different from any other single industry high growth community? Is it any different from a mining and oil and gas and boomtown? Is it any different from a high-tech boomtown? Are these characteristics of rising housing costs characteristics that we see in any high growth area? So here's one thing we can do. We can think of outdoor recreation as a way to diversify. So when you look at a landscape like this and you think, yeah, this would attract a lot of tourists, who else does it attract? So you can use outdoor recreation, of course, to attract tourists, but you can also use it to attract manufacturers. Or you can use it to attract amenity migrants, or use it to keep residents from leaving. Why should I go anywhere else when I've got places like that right in my back door? It attracts entrepreneurs who are attracted by a high quality of life, and it attracts talented employees. It's a competitive advantage for people who hire to say, come work here because you have ready access to the outdoors. And then it attracts retirees and people with investment income. And oftentimes, when you look at the numbers, you'll realize this is often the single largest driver in your economy is retirement and investment income. So that's the bulk of what I wanted to discuss with you. I'm going to end with a few resources that are available on our website. So if you go to Headwaters Economics, you'll see a menu across the top, and when you click on outdoor recreation, there's a whole variety of resources there. One of them is a library of trail benefits. This is a curated list of about 200 studies that we think are credible, well-done studies that document the economic impact of an investment in outdoor recreation infrastructure. And you can search by business impacts, you can search by property value, by public health impacts, and you can search by the use type. So for example, here I looked at business impacts related to cycling in the West, and you realize there's 7 studies there, and then you can look at those studies, we summarize them for you, we show you how to cite it, and we give you a link to the actual study if you want to read it as well. Other things that you can find on our website is a variety of different studies that we've done for people around the country, documenting the economic benefits of outdoor recreation. And then I want to leave you with this final one, and that is we have a whole lot of tools available on our website that are available for free. One of them is called the Economic Profile System. You can run detailed socioeconomic profiles. You can geek out and learn about non-labor income and entrepreneurship and employment by industry. You can produce these very detailed socioeconomic reports, all with the click of a button, and they're free. So that's the bulk of my presentation. I think we have some time available for questions. And thanks a lot. And here's my contact information.
Great, Ray. Thank you, man. You dropped some great graphs, some great data, some great points. You know, as many of us here that work and live this every day, and something I really have done for the last, well, actually most of my career in building outdoor communities, is really helping stakeholders understand that outdoor recreation really is, it's more than just play, it's more than just recreation, it's more than tourism, attraction, retention, industry. You listed so many great things. I did have some great questions come through, Ray, that I'd love to dive a little deeper with you on.
Yeah, let's
You know,
do
you,
that. And
you
by the way, I
mentioned,
just want to say one more time,
sure.
this entire presentation is on our website. Just, in the search feature, just type slides or slideshows and you'll see it there.
Great. Yeah, we can't encourage you all enough, attendees, to go visit their site and their tools. It's an amazing resource that I've been tapping into and, as he said, geeking out on for a while. And I know some of our presenters today are going to geek out and have geeked out on many of that data too. Ray, you mentioned some really iconic destination communities, but we know you do work all over. What advice would you give to a community that really isn't a gateway to these vast, iconic tracts of public lands? Maybe some of those metropolitan areas that aren't up next to, like Salt Lake, up next to some great mountains.
Yeah.
What advice would you give to them when they're those that are really working to increase their access and really become an outdoor community?
Yeah, and you don't need to be next to Yellowstone National Park to be an outdoor community, right? You just have to be a place that recognizes that an investment in infrastructure, and what I mean by that is trails and parks and climbing rocks, and it doesn't matter where that is. It could be in the middle of Milwaukee, it could be in the middle of New York City. People getting outdoors. I think we're going to have a wider representation of people visiting the outdoors if we make facilities available to them right where they live. It doesn't have to involve an expensive trip across the country to go visit a national park. It could be right in your neighborhood.
Great. I love it. So, you mentioned, I love the term virus refugees. Our region is very popular. Our trailheads are packed. Noah mentioned some of that in his opening, and we're seeing a huge desire to get outside. And of course now, and heighten a larger availability for being remote and working. What trends are you seeing in regards to this virus refugee movement, and any forecasting, any thoughts or suggestions from your perspective, looking at this data over time to help communities understand and manage this better?
Forecasting is dangerous business, right? So I won't get into that. Because, well, we
you don't have a crystal ball, Ray? You don't have a crystal ball?
But we do have to ask ourselves, what's going to happen when and if we return to normal? Are people going to suddenly go back to vacationing in Mexico and going back into museums and doing stuff that they used to do they can't do now? And will that relieve some of the pressure on our trails, or have we gotten permanent advocates? I mean, these are people who maybe discovered for the first time how wonderful it is to go for a walk in the neighborhood, or how wonderful it is to go on the trail. And in the future, they become powerful advocates for the outdoors. And so when there's a threat to our outdoors, suddenly we've got more people speaking up saying, hey, no, we experienced during COVID, this is a lifesaver for us. This is really important for our mental health, and to become permanent advocates and become involved. That would be a wonderful thing. And hopefully that's the end result of this.
Yeah, we can always use more advocates and champions for getting outside, for sure. Another topic you mentioned, and is while not as in front of our mind as COVID, the idea of climate change and how it's impacting outdoor recreation. What role, from our audience, we had a question come in, what role does building resilience against the risk of climate change have in building outdoor communities? You have any thoughts on that?
Well, resilience to climate change is, that's a broad topic, right? I remember one time participating in a meeting in Portland, Oregon, and I got to kind of facilitate a gathering of all the communities in and around Portland. And it was amazing to me listening to the Parks and Rec department talking about how they have to replant trees all the time, right? Because the trees die, and you just have sort of this replacement schedule. They were planting trees not on the current climate or on the past climate, but they were planting new species of trees based on what was going to be the climate in the future. So we're already seeing this in city departments where they're anticipating what climate change will look like into the future, and they're changing recreation infrastructure to match that. So I mean, that's just one example. I can't address that all-encompassing question about climate change right here.
I've got a prompt for you there, Ray, possibly. And so I'm thinking about the kind of dual uses of recreation amenities as also climate change resilience buffers, right? We talk about, like floodplains and green spaces. Is there anything you've seen there where communities are kind of utilizing those?
Well, yeah. For example, we work with a lot of communities on wildfire. And one of the things we're seeing is that, okay, you could create a bit of a buffer so that at least ground fires do not spread to the community. So when you've got a bike path around a community, around a neighborhood, and that bike path has green space on either side of it, it forms a bit of a buffer to keep
Like a fire break.
Yeah, a fire break of sorts. And we're also seeing that in the design of golf courses, for example. The standard is you have the golf course in the middle and all the homes around the edge. And now in a world when fire is more frequent, people are thinking, no, you put the communities in the middle and you put the golf course around the edge, right?
Mm-hmm.
So in other words, surround the community, surround the homes with green space. And if your purpose for creating the green space is recreation, great, but it has a dual purpose. It also serves as a buffer. We're seeing that with flooding as well, right? And you can see, for example, the Netherlands is leading on this. They always have. But they'll build a soccer field, but that soccer field will be depressed. It'll be all the way down into a gully so that when there's flooding, that whole area can flood, including the soccer field, right? So in other words, submerged sports fields that serve a dual purpose of also absorbing floodwater. Boulder, Colorado did a really good job of that. They're known for all their bike paths, but it turns out those bike paths were also places for floodwater to go. So there's a lot of thinking there, and it's one of the good things about that with these co-benefits where you're saying, this community needs to protect itself against flooding. If you're also creating a bike path, you're also creating a nature reserve there. You have all these co-benefits, and now you've got all these other advocates in the community who are going to work together for a common cause.
Great. Ray, another topic you mentioned that I think people would love to hear you maybe elaborate on some best practice examples is the idea of recreation communities have higher housing costs. Have you seen any good examples of any communities that have done a good job with that balance, either maintaining, reducing, and ensuring that the support the community and the individuals that have to work in that industry are able to maintain and live there? Any great communities or resources you might have on your website you can direct people to?
Yeah, it's the issue of housing is it's a wickedly difficult problem, and you can find examples. Telluride, for example, has neighborhoods where they're allowing people to build secondary housing units on top of the garages, and they're allowing people to split their properties in half. So, the person who buys the garage with a housing unit above it can actually own half of the property, and getting more creative about reducing the setback requirements, allowing more secondary units, and allowing you to turn your garage into a home so that that happens. I mean, a lot of these communities doing this, but the bottom line is it's really hard to create affordable housing. Edward Glaser, a Harvard economist who wrote pretty interesting book called The Triumph of the City, made a really interesting point about economic growth. He says, if you want to look at one measure of economic growth and one measure of economic success, it's lack of affordable housing. Just any place that's growing has that problem. And so the tragedy behind this is that the promotion for the growth occurs without a discussion of housing. And then the growth happens, and then people go, oh, we should have thought about housing. Rarely do we see a community, before they start promoting outdoor recreation, think about housing ahead of time. Like, how are we going to harness some of this growth through an open space depletion tax or a sales tax and earmark that towards affordable housing?
Yeah, that's a great point.
That's a really good point. And I think if more communities are listening right now that are planning to develop recreation infrastructure and drive people to their towns and awaken their communities, are thinking ahead of time about the potential, opposite effects, things you don't want to see happen, like lack of affordable housing, and planning for those and really being creative around that now, that's going to change a lot.
If you don't, what you end up creating is an enclave for the rich.
Right.
And the service workers end up having to commute over a dangerous mountain pass or far away where the housing is more affordable. That seems to be the story throughout the country of how it's evolved. And I challenge communities, before you promote recreation, have your affordable housing plan in place first.
Love it.
That's powerful, Ray. Thank you.
We got time for one more. No, you got
one more question. So, if you could name one element that jumpstarts a destination to become an outdoor community, what would it be? You know, is it one person, one organization? Like, kind of, what's that spark? Is it a vibrant downtown? Like, what makes that thing happen?
Oh, yeah, it's a good question. It's usually a small nonprofit that has been created locally with the purpose of developing recreation infrastructure. For us, it's the Gallatin Valley Land Trust with our Main Street to the Mountains trail system. In Whitefish, again, it was a group of volunteers who got together and said, hey, we've got this opportunity of making Whitefish a destination for people. They'll just drive through here on your way to Glacier, stop and spend some time here. So they developed recreation infrastructure. It's often a small group of volunteers, create a nonprofit, do some fundraising, do trail building, and then the word gets out, right? Word gets out that that's a cool place to go. And let's go spend a few days there and spend some money and stay at a hotel and eat at a restaurant. But I think it starts with, you've got to develop the recreation infrastructure. And that often is done not by government, but by volunteers and by local nonprofits.
I think we're going to hear from some folks who kind of have done that work today. And it seems like, and it's like, and after you have that first spark, and then it's the partnership building that kind of like keeps the fire rolling, right? It's like, if that's your source of heat, you got to have that fuel and that oxygen, right? So now we're talking about what do we do to kind of keep that rolling? That's the partnership elements. Does that seem right to you, Ray?
Yeah, we have an example just outside of Bozeman where just one guy, spent 2 years talking to the Bureau of Land Management to get permission to build some trails. And he'd hold a fundraiser at a brewery and he'd raise $10,000 and he'd go and out there with his buddies with shovels and they'd dig and then they'd run out of money and then they'd have another fundraiser. And, 8 years later, we have people going, it's a destination. People come from all around from many other states to go visit this place because it's so amazing. And it was one guy who just said, this has to happen. And he was so enthusiastic, people just caught the spirit and started working with him. And pretty soon you're out there with your family with a shovel, because you can't help but be enthusiastic and follow the guy along. And it's called the Copper City Trail System. And, it's just the power of one person. Great.
Ray, if the chat being lit up with excitement and questions and energy is any indication of how much people enjoyed your conversation, we did too. I knew this would happen. I'm fired up. Thank you, Ray. Can't thank you enough. Everybody, please, we implore you to connect with Ray and his team. Get on their website. We could talk about this stuff forever. So thanks for joining us from Montana, Ray, and being a part of the Outdoor Economy Conference this year. We look forward to getting in touch with you soon.
Thanks.
Have a great rest of your day. Whew, that was, people are excited. Like, I'm loving these tools. People nerd out on data, which is great because we got more coming.
Yeah, we sure do.
Ray really set the stage, really teed it up as we knew he would.